if I can start with you, Minister Brojonegoro, in light of the mood in Davos seems to be a lot of doom and gloom, and especially when it comes to emerging markets, a lot of headwinds. It seems like it. What is your outlook on Indonesia and the emerging market world today?
Okay, John, I think you are right to mention that this is not a time for the emerging market, unfortunately. I believe we have followed what happened in the global, starting what happened with the US in 2008, 2009, followed by the Europe. And unfortunately, after US, Europe actually is a turn of the emerging economy. And of course, we are in the very challenging situation. And at the same time, 2016, at least there are two issues facing us. First is the slowdown in China, although they recorded 6.9%, but still relatively, slowed down compared to their high economic growth. And then, of course, secondly is the low oil price. Low oil price is not about the oil itself, but mostly about the commodity price. It means that we don't have basically too much ammunition. So what we have to do as an economy, first, we need to establish our domestic economy by still keep spending on the government side, especially for infrastructure, in not only just to build the infrastructure, but more importantly to boost the economy itself. And then secondly, of course, attracting the investment. And I think the forum like this is very important because basically Indonesia still needs foreign direct investment. And from our side, we are still welcoming very much the importance of the FDI. Yeah.
So what is your outlook for Indonesia's growth this year?
Okay, I still stick to the outlook in our budget 2016, which is economic growth of 5.3%. And I think the figure is still doable, given the fact that according to many analysts, although as I mentioned, it's not the time for the emerging economy, but they still consider Indonesia is one of very few bright spots in the emerging economy.
Wonderful. Maybe I can turn to you, Minister Lembong. What are your priorities? So you're one of the newest ministers in our cabinet. What are your priorities as you take office?
Well, thank you very much, John. I think I want to start by reiterating a point which President Jokowi made in his speech at the Brookings Institution a couple of months ago in Washington. And that is that any situation can be a problem or an opportunity, depending on what you make of it, right? True, we are now in the middle of an emerging markets downturn, but as the President has said, it's actually a great opportunity to push through painful and in many cases overdue reforms, right? And Minister Brojonegoro can confirm in cabinet meetings, right? The President's underlined, forget about pushing these reforms when times are good. It's not going to happen. But when times are difficult, when anxiety is high, when people are more open to new things, like now, this is the time for reform.
What would be some of those reforms?
So I think it's probably on the trade side reasonably well covered in the media, but we're trying to execute what could be one of the sharpest policy U-turns in recent Indonesian history, which is a country, Indonesia, which for the last 10 years, and certainly, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, it's probably resorted the most heavily to protectionist measures. It's now wanting to go precisely the opposite direction, right? We're now trying to actually dismantle protectionism, smoothen our integration into regional and global supply chains. It's frankly, a fairly radical change of paradigm, I would say, and I think it's part of what President Jokowi called a mindset revolution, right? And that's conceptual, it's ideological, it's also mechanical, regulations in the field. Our civil servants, my colleagues in Trade Ministry, our colleagues all around the different ministries.
There's been a lot of talks about the revision of the negative list for foreign direct investment. What are some of the what are some of the industries that are being discussed and could possibly be opened?
BKPM Chairman Sibarani has already made some comments with respect to, for example, the hotel industry, movie theaters and movie production, movie distribution. But frankly, what we agreed to in the cabinet was to give it a bit more time and to go for something a little bit more ambitious. I think Minister Bojonegoro and I don't want to preempt our coordinating minister, but the timetable is, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks until we see the bigger announcement.
And last question for you before I move on. In your previous life, you were a fund manager. You're running one of the largest private equities in Indonesia. How do you view the Indonesian economy today from that perspective?
Well, as an investor, in hindsight, the boom times were actually a terrible time to invest, which we put capital to work, because that's when it's easy to invest, right? Things are booming, you put forward very rosy financial projections. That turned out to be not the case. That turned out not to be the best time to invest. Actually, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I would say now is the best time to invest. The currency is off 35%. Personally, by measures of trade competitiveness, I think it's very competitive, at this point. Using my glasses as a lifelong finance and investing person, I would actually say, we're probably nearing some kind of a bottom, and probably now is a better time to invest in Indonesia and emerging markets, especially if you're a long-term investor.
Great. Pak Budi, you run Indonesia's largest bank. What is your outlook of the economy, and what do you see the role of banking in Indonesia's growth?
Indonesia is very unlucky because we have a lot of volatility in the last 15 years. It happens in 1998, 2005, 2008. But also Indonesia is very lucky because during those crises, we still have finance minister like Pak Bambang, conglomerate like you, and bankers like me that still doing the same job, still live, and we survive. So actually, we have a lot of experience in facing the crisis. And to prove that we are survived, actually we can handle the crisis well. I still remember when back in 1998, the senior banker told me, Budi, you have nothing left on your right side of your balance sheet and you have nothing right on your left side of your balance sheet. But also, my experience tells me in the last 25 years as banker that during good times, Indonesian people make bad policy. But during bad times, Indonesian people make a good policy. So I strongly believe, and I've seen what Pak Bambang is doing, Pak Darmin is doing, Pak Tom Lemos is doing, we are making a lot of good policy. To be honest, last year and this year is not a star year for Indonesia, but I still see opportunity ahead. I have many Chinese customers that teach me something, and I've seen it in practice back in 1998. Crisis in Chinese is, they call it Wei, correct me if I'm wrong, because Wei Qi. Yeah. It's two characters. One character, Wei, can be paired with another character called Wei Xian, which is danger. But Qi also can be paired with other character called Qi Hui, which is opportunity. So, crisis happen in Indonesia, it imposes danger, but it also open opportunity for you that is sharp enough to see the opportunity.
Excellent. Despite the strong headwinds that Indonesia is facing, many people claim that Indonesia today is much stronger than it was, let's say, in 1998. And one of the reasons cited is the health of the banking sector today. Would you agree with that?
Sorry to be a little bit technical. Banks is being measured by the capital. So back in 2008, the average capital adequacy ratio, that is the ratio is used by banks all over the world, is below 15%. Now the average is 17-18%. So we are much stronger. I still remember back in 2008, the non-performing loan for the banking system reached 5%. Now it's only like 2.5, below 3%. Liquidity position in 2008, you feel that US dollar liquidity is almost none. Now US dollar liquidity is very, very ample. Rupiah liquidity, because of Pak Bambang, withdrawing all the money at the end of the year is a little bit tight, but now it's okay. It's back to normal because Pak Bambang also spent the money very, very fast this year. Thank you to Pak Bambang. So I think, yes, we are facing headwinds, but again, I remember, John, you told me about this. When the wind of change is coming, many people will build walls, but only smart and few people build the windmills. So I think we should build the windmills.
Great. If I could turn to you, Pak Anin. Pak Anin, in your capacity as Vice Chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce of Kadin, how do you see the economy from the private sector's perspective?
First of all, thank you, John, for having me here. First, let's take a look at the fundamentals, right? Let's check whether the factors that help us to get here are still sustainable going forward, right? Especially in the last 20 years. The first one, social political reform. I think since 97, we had that, and nobody wants to go back to authoritarian rule. I think it is here to stay. Stuff like the election of President Jokowi, Governor Ahok wouldn't be thinkable in the past. Now it is possible and nobody wants to go back. And that will bring sustainability in the economy going forward. The second thing, I think domestic consumption is here to stay, if not growing. 65% of the GDP already. Yes, one would argue that it is because little windfall profit from the commodity boom, but I would argue later on that the infrastructure development and regional growth, as well as digital innovation, will take over that past boom. So I think we will continue to grow domestic consumption, and if we can grow from being the 16th largest economy in the world to something else, I think it's something good, right? Because at the end of the day, we talk about a trillion economy, big economy, and all that, but this is $4,000 per GDP per capita, right? So that's still pretty low. And the last thing, the demographic growth. I think it's not gonna change. People will still make babies, and I think more so when they're happier. And having 45% of the population of ASEAN in the era of ASEAN community coming up, I think that's only a good thing. If there is one thing which is a challenge for all of us, not only the government, parliament, but also the private sector, is whether we can continue to grow again the economy, domestic consumption, what have you, despite the fact that the oil price is below $30. China is having a little bit of challenges. The Fed being reducing rate and all that, and also the radicalism that we can talk about it later. But I think as we can talk about it, as we talk later, I think we're resilient enough. We have been here before. I think this is not the time to be complacent by any means. But I think if we are focused on what we should do and what we do best, I think we can overcome the current challenges.
On the issue, you mentioned ASEAN. On the issue of ASEAN, are Indonesian businesses ready for that opening up?
Well, it is one of those things, right? You will never be ready until you get there. I think Mike Tyson says that, right? Until you get hit in the face, you don't know how to box, right? So it's one of those things that I think Indonesians are ready, because by nature, if you are sizable, scalable in Indonesia, you are scalable in ASEAN. But having said that, not to be complacent in any means, we need to produce a lot more things, ranging from infrastructure development that we need to build, but also just human resource. We, for example, I think produce like 50,000 engineers. I'm an engineer myself a year, compared to China about 750,000, and then maybe India about 300,000 is not enough. So all those things, as the GDP per capita improve, people will need to be more educated, and health will be needed, which is a business in and of itself. And at the same time, they need also entertainment, which we also can do well in that business. Yeah.
Professor, if I can turn to you with a few questions. As the non-Indonesian on this panel, can you provide what is the perspective on what's happening in Indonesia? Do you agree with what's been said, or are we delusional being from Indonesia?
Now, do you want me to be diplomatic or not?
You're always diplomatic.
I was a diplomat for 33 years. No, okay. Let me speak frankly. I mean, I think you're right. There's doom and gloom in Davos. I think it's excessive. I think it doesn't get the big picture right. But leaving aside what's happening in Europe, or whether or not Donald Trump will be elected president of America, leaving all that aside, if you look at our region, it's clear we are sailing through troubled waters now. That's obvious, right? The figures all say so. The question is, as you sail through these troubled waters, are you going to enter rougher waters or calmer waters around the corner? And it's very clear, if you look objectively at the larger picture of Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia, if you look at the big picture, around the corner, many good things are awaiting us. I mean, the Economist cover story got China completely wrong. You know, they show this week President Xi Jinping riding a dragon that is going down. Excuse me, that dragon is going up. 10 years from now, China will be much bigger, much stronger, more capable. The Chinese middle class is exploding. Already 100 million Chinese travel overseas as tourists, and many will come to Southeast Asia. Just one example. India is going to become the fastest growing economy, 7.3%. And as you know, traditionally, if you look back over the past 2,000 years, Southeast Asia has always been affected by what happens in China, what happens in India. And if these two countries basically get it right, we get the benefits too. But the real good news about Southeast Asia, and this is what you call the big elephant in the room that no one has noticed, is that the reason why we are relatively calm about Southeast Asia is because we have created something called ASEAN. It's the most boring organization in the world. But, you know, in a world of troubles, boredom is wonderful, you know. And I can tell you that ASEAN has created an ecosystem of peace which we take for granted. We see problems in the Middle East, we see problems happening within Turkey and Russia and so on and so forth. You notice in our region, the guns are silent. Now that's a very big deal, you know, for the most diverse region on our planet. And that's not the only thing that ASEAN has delivered. I'm very happy to hear this is good news when you say that Indonesia wants to change its paradigm and now be more open and so on and so forth. The good news is that the ASEAN Economic Community has created a very detailed blueprint, point by point, on how you can open up the different sectors. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have reached agreement on those points. Now, the tragedy about ASEAN is that when it comes to implementation, the ASEAN track record in implementation is pretty bad. Even the ASEAN Secretariat said it's about 80%. And if you work with ASEAN, you know that ASEAN moves like a crab. Takes 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 1 step sideways. You look at it in slow-term motion, it seems to be moving now in circles. And then a decade later, you discover ASEAN has moved so far ahead. Why? So you have to understand the dynamics of each region. And for us, you know, the good news for us is that with Indonesia deciding to open up, and I'm not giving any secrets away, and I suspect you may all beat me up for this. Traditionally, Indonesia has been the most reluctant country to open up its economy within the ASEAN family. That's been a tradition. It goes back 30, 40 years. But despite that, the trend is towards opening up, you know. And my message to my Indonesian friends is a very simple thing. In a global era, you have to deal with global competition. Forget the idea you can just succeed regionally. But if Indonesia, the largest economy, cannot compete in the ASEAN Economic Community, which is a baby pool of competition, relatively speaking, how are you going to compete globally? And therefore, if Indonesia makes a big leap forward, implements the ASEAN Economic Community provisions, then believe me, the projections for ASEAN growth grow even more better in the next decade. So if AEC is implemented, goes beyond 80% to 90%, 95%, I guarantee you that ASEAN will grow faster and Indonesia will do better. I hope I got rid of some of the doom and gloom here.
Excellent, excellent. Can I turn to you, Minister Brojonegoro? Do you share the professor's optimistic view of ASEAN and what Indonesia stands to gain?
Yeah, I think, of course, what Professor Bang Mubadi mentioned about the reluctant side of Indonesia, I think it really happens because I'm involved in the financial sector. But it's simply because we are the biggest market and we always feel that others trying to, you know, take advantage of our market. But then...
You are the most beautiful lady.
But then in my opinion, we believe we have the advantage of being competitive in ASEAN. Sometimes people forget, because we always feel that we are only the market. But if you remember that, although we are the market, we also have the position to make our industry more efficient, to be even competitive in our market itself, because then our challenge now is how to make our companies, Indonesian companies, competitive enough in our domestic market. And if you are competitive in domestic market, then I believe you will be competitive in ASEAN. And we have some examples. I believe here there are representatives from automotive industry. Now our automotive industry that used to be protected in the past, used to get a lot of privilege. Now they have become competitive domestically, and now they have the capacity to do export because what? Because they can competitive with other similar automotive industry in ASEAN.
If I can go back to you, Bapak Anin, you've been over the last 2-3 years investing quite a lot in technology in Indonesia. What's happening in Indonesia on the digital side?
Yeah. I think, look, if you look at technology, it's basically trying to get rid of inefficiency, right? And we have quite a lot of it in Indonesia, and that's normal for a growing country, right? Tell you a couple of anecdotes that Indonesia actually, are already innovative from, long back, right? If you go to Indonesia, you go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, you would imagine that you go there, get buckets of chicken. It's actually the largest music distributor in Indonesia as well, right? So that's how they make money. And the same thing like 7-Eleven, right? If you go to 7-Eleven, wherever, you come in and go, but over there is a place to hang out, and you have more sitting area than retail area, for example, right? Now, I would say the source of the innovation is still the same for digital innovation because it just spurred the growth even further. Now, we as a group have a media arm and we touch 170 million people every day, but we think technology will change, right? And when we talk about technology, we don't only talk about e-commerce, but e-commerce is certainly big. John's company, next year will be 1 billion GMV. The same thing, we have one of the members here, Alvin, another e-commerce marketplace, will also get there. So it is not small by any mean, right? But it doesn't stop there because you also have another vertical that's also interesting, which is enabling technology, right? Whether you call it the last mile distribution like Gojek, whether you call it Craved, which is OpenTable.com in Indonesia, which has already 20,000 restaurants hooked up. Or the last thing is the advertising and digital media. Because no matter what, people in Indonesia, they're very well connected.